Don't enter the tower!
Down on the street, the city ran on a different clock entirely. Norma shifted the delivery bag on her aching shoulder and approached the service entrance of Global Hour. She was early. The lobby desk had told her to wait by the side entrance until 5:50, something about a signature authorization that had to come down from upstairs. She set the bag down and stretched her back. That's when she heard them. 3 men, dark suits, standing just around the curve of the building's side wall where the camera angle went dead. She'd noticed the blind spot the second she walked up, old habit from her university days, when she used to study urban architecture to distract herself from the Russian literature courses she was failing. She wasn't failing Russian, though. Russian she had loved. Russian she had mastered. And the 3 men around the corner were speaking it right now, low and loose, the way people speak a language when they're certain no one around them understands a single word. Norma didn't move. She didn't breathe. He takes the elevator every time, never the stairs. Gregor confirmed the 6 o'clock window. Both units are already inside. The moment those doors close behind him, the 3rd man made a sound, not words, just a sound. Norma's stomach dropped through the concrete. She looked at the black SUV idling at the tower's front entrance. She looked at the Global Tower sign above the revolving doors, the red arrow on the company's street-level logo pointing right at it, like a warning she was only now reading correctly. 6 p.m. She checked the clock on her phone. 5:44. 16 minutes. A delivery woman who'd spent 4 years studying a language she thought she'd never use again was the only person on Earth who knew what was about to happen in those elevators. And the man walking into them had an army of people around him, not one of whom she could trust. Drop a comment right now. Did you expect her to be the one who understood? Norma has 16 minutes, a heavy delivery bag, and 0 authority to stop the most dangerous man in the city from walking into his own execution. She's been ignored her entire shift. She's been invisible her entire career. But invisible people hear everything. Subscribe so you don't miss the moment she grabs his arm, and comment where you're watching from. I want to personally say hello and find out exactly how far our story has traveled. Every location drops my jaw a little more. Let's see where you are. Norma's day had started at 6:12 a.m. with a cold cup of coffee and a routing notification that made her close her eyes for 3 full seconds before she accepted it. 22 deliveries, cross-district, peak surcharge active, which sounded like good news until you factored in the downtown traffic, the buildings with no loading access, and the apartment complexes where the elevator was always broken on the floor you needed. She'd done this math before. Everyone at Urban Dash had. The surcharge meant the company was understaffed and overwhelmed. It meant you'd be running from 6 a.m. until the city swallowed the sun. It meant your shoulder would ache in the specific way it only ached after hour 9, and you'd still smile at the door because your rating affected your weekly bonus, and the weekly bonus was the only reason any of it made sense. Norma was good at the math. She was good at a lot of things people didn't know about. She pulled her braids back, tucked them under her Urban Dash cap, zipped her blue and yellow jacket up against the October air, and grabbed the insulated bag from the back seat of her car. The bag had her name marker penned on the inside flap, N. Abrams, because someone at the depot had mixed hers up with another driver's 3 weeks ago, and she'd lost a full shift sorting it out. She couldn't afford another lost shift. $14 left in checking. 47 if she counted savings, but she'd promised herself she wouldn't count savings anymore. That was her daughter's school fund, and it wasn't moving. Rent was due Friday. Today was Tuesday. She had 11 completed drops behind her and 1 priority package riding in the front seat like a passenger. A sealed matte black box, no branding, routed to Global Tower with a commercial authorization code she'd had to enter twice at the depot before the system accepted it. Priority packages paid triple. This one alone was covering dinner and the electric bill. She needed it signed, sealed, and done. By the time she merged onto the downtown corridor, the city had shifted into that particular late afternoon mode where everyone moved faster than they needed to and slower than they wanted to. The light off the glass towers was golden and sharp. Global Tower rose above the intersection at Meridian and 5th like a statement. 41 floors of dark glass and steel, the kind of building that didn't need a large sign because everyone already knew what it was. Norma knew it too. She'd delivered to the lobby desk twice before. Routine drop. Sign the screen, receive the stub, leave. The lobby staff were polite the way expensive hotels trained their people to be polite, surface level, efficient, and fundamentally uninterested in you. She'd navigated worse. She found a delivery bay on the building's east side, killed the engine, and checked her app. The routing note had been updated since she left the depot. Priority recipient authorization pending. Report to service entrance, east side. Wait for clearance. Do not enter lobby without confirmation code from upstairs. She read it twice. It was 5:31 p.m. She had until 6 to complete the drop or it rolled to a failed delivery, which meant no triple pay, which meant this entire crosstown push had been for standard rate. She got out of the car. The wind off the street was cold and smelled like exhaust and the distant suggestion of rain. She lifted the bag onto her shoulder, tucked the priority box under her arm, and walked toward the service entrance on the building's blind side, where a narrow alcove separated the main tower wall from the parking structure attached to it. No one was at the service door. She pressed the intercom, waited, pressed it again. A voice crackled through. "Lobby desk, what's the drop?" Urban Dash, priority package, authorization code 7 Tango Delta 4. I was told to wait here for clearance. A pause, the sound of someone typing with one hand. Clearance is coming down from 41. Give it 10 minutes. My window closes at 6. 10 minutes. The intercom cut out. Norma exhaled through her nose and set the bag down beside the alcove wall. She checked the time. 5:33. She had 27 minutes before the window closed, which meant she had time but not extra time, and the difference between those two things in this job was everything. She leaned against the wall. She stretched her shoulder, and that's when she heard the voices around the corner. Tokko Sung-Soo stepped out of the elevator on the 41st floor at 5:34 p.m. and immediately knew that 3 things in his office had been moved. His chair was at the wrong angle. The surface of his desk had been wiped. He could tell by the absence of the faint ring his morning coffee left every day on the left side of his blotter. And the small framed photograph on the credenza behind his desk had been shifted 2 inches to the right. None of his staff would move that photograph. They all knew better. He stood in the doorway for a moment without speaking, and the 2 assistants at the outer desks both looked up and then looked immediately back down, which told him they hadn't been in the office and hadn't seen who had. He walked to his desk, sat down, set his briefcase at the precise angle that allowed him to open it with his right hand without adjusting his posture. He thought about the photograph. He thought about Gregor. He opened his briefcase and reviewed the evening's materials without expression. A property acquisition summary, a legal letter from the city's zoning commission, which he would ignore, a 1-page report from his financial oversight team that confirmed what he already knew. 3 of his regional accounts had been quietly drained by 0.4% each over the last 6 weeks. Small enough to miss, large enough to mean something if you knew how to read it. He knew how to read it. Someone inside his organization was preparing for a transition. They were moving money first. That was always how it started. The ones who came after power never understood that you could see them coming from miles away, precisely because they thought they were being subtle. Sung-Soo had built his empire on one principle: never mistake patience for blindness. He was patient. He was never blind. He pressed the intercom on his desk. "Get me Min Jae." 30 seconds later, his driver's voice came through, steady and low. Min Jae had been with him 11 years. He was the only man in Sung-Soo's orbit who had never once tried to make himself more important than he was. That alone made him irreplaceable. "Sir, car at the front. 6 o'clock. Not the East Bay. Front entrance. A beat of silence. The route is set for East Bay, sir. Gregor's team coordinated. Front entrance, 6 o'clock. Understood. Sung-Soo released the intercom. He looked at the photograph on the credenza. His mother, Busan 1987. She was laughing at something off camera, and she looked completely free in a way she never looked when she was actually looking at him, because he'd always made the people around him feel the weight of him, even when he wasn't trying. He stood. He put on his charcoal jacket. He buttoned the middle button and left the collar of his white shirt open by exactly one button, the way he always did, because the world expected a tie from a man like him, and he had never found anything useful in giving the world what it expected. He picked up his briefcase. He was going to walk into that lobby and ride that elevator and see exactly which of his men reacted to a change in routine they hadn't been told about. Their faces would tell him everything. They always did. He rode the elevator down in silence. When the lobby doors opened, the city was golden and cold, and the black SUV was already at the front curb, Min-jae standing at the rear door with his hands at his sides, watching the street with the quiet precision of a man who understood that his job was not to be seen, but to see everything. Sung-Soo walked through the revolving doors and paused on the top step. He had learned to read a crowd at 18 on the street, when reading a crowd was the difference between a broken nose and making it home. He still did it now. Every room, every sidewalk, every lobby. A sweep. 2 seconds. File and forget.
The front steps. 3 pedestrians moving east. A taxi double parked. Min-jae. 2 guards flanking the entrance. Yoon on the left, and on the right, a man whose name he'd already decided he was not going to use again by the end of tonight. And then movement. Coming fast from the building's east side. A woman in a blue and yellow jacket, delivery bag slung over one shoulder, a dark box tucked under her arm. Moving with the specific, desperate energy of someone who had been trying to get someone's attention and had run out of softer options. Her name tag said N. Abrams. She was looking directly at him. Sung-Soo's guards moved first. He held up one hand, barely, just 2 fingers lifted from the handle of his briefcase, and they stopped. He watched her come. She hadn't been trying to listen. That was the thing she would think about later, in the quiet moments when the whole day replayed itself in pieces. She hadn't positioned herself strategically or pressed her ear to the wall or done any of the things a person does when they decide to eavesdrop. She had simply been standing in an alcove waiting for a clearance code, tired and cold, running the numbers in her head the way she always did. Rent Friday, deposit Thursday. She needed 4 good days between now and the weekend. And the voices had come around the corner and landed in her ears like they had always been meant for her. 3 men. She hadn't seen them yet. She could hear them through the gap where the alcove wall met the parking structure's exterior, a seam in the architecture, 6 inches wide, the kind of gap that exists in every large building and that nobody ever thinks about because nobody ever needs to. She almost tuned out. Her brain registered foreign language and began the automatic drift toward her own thoughts, the way it did when music played in a restaurant, present, not processed. And then a word landed that her brain didn't drift past. Elevator. She stilled. She didn't move her body. She didn't shift her weight. She had spent 4 years studying Russian literature at a state university she could no longer afford to finish. And in those 4 years, she had learned the language the way she learned most things, completely, stubbornly, until it lived in her the same way English did. She had let the degree go. She had not let the language go. She stood very still and she listened. The man speaking was doing so in the relaxed, abbreviated way of someone who had been speaking this language their entire life and was not thinking about being understood, shortening words, blurring consonants, trusting shared context to carry the meaning. Norma carried the meaning just fine. He takes the elevator every time, never the stairs, not once in 3 years. A second voice, lower. Gregor confirmed the 6 o'clock window. Both units are already staged. East elevator bank. The moment the doors close, the first man again. And the woman from the lobby desk? Reassigned to North Wing. She won't be at the desk. Good. The delivery driver? A pause. The sound of something, a phone maybe, being checked. Still waiting for clearance. She's right around the corner. A pause. Let her wait.
By the time they sort out the chaos, she's the one standing closest to the body. Convenient. Low laughter. The practiced, unbothered laughter of men who had done this kind of mouth before and found it simple. 6 o'clock. Not before. Not before. Norma did not move. Her hand had gone cold around the strap of the delivery bag. Her ears were ringing with the specific frequency of adrenaline. Not panic, not yet, but the body's first serious message that something had shifted, and the rules of the next few minutes were not the rules she'd woken up understanding. She looked at her phone. 5:44. She looked at the priority package under her arm, sealed matte black box, no branding, timed delivery, authorization code that had taken 2 entries to process. By the time they sort out the chaos, she's the one standing closest to the body. The package wasn't a delivery. It was a placement. She was the fall person. She had been routed to this exact spot at this exact time by people who needed a witness with no credibility and no connections, standing in the wrong place at the wrong moment. A gig worker, a nobody in a blue and yellow jacket with a company bag and a name tag that said N. Abrams. Invisible people made perfect scapegoats. She set the package down against the wall. She picked up only the insulated bag, and she walked, fast, not running. Running attracted attention she couldn't afford yet, toward the front of Global Tower. The lobby desk was staffed by a young man in a gray vest who was typing something with the focused urgency of a person who had decided that whatever was on his screen was more important than whatever was about to walk through the door. Norma walked through the door. "Excuse me." He looked up. His eyes went to her jacket, her bag, her cap. She watched his expression complete its assessment in under 2 seconds and arrive at a conclusion she'd seen on 100 faces before his. "Deliveries are processed at the service entrance, east side. You'll need to..." "I know, I was just there. I need to speak with someone about the building security." "Ma'am, if you have a concern about a package..." "It's not about a package." She kept her voice low, controlled, the way she learned to keep it when she needed someone to actually hear her instead of simply waiting for her to finish. "There are men at the east service entrance. I overheard them planning something, an ambush, in the elevators, at 6. The young man's expression shifted from dismissal to a particular kind of patient condescension that Norma recognized as the face people made when they were deciding how to manage a situation without escalating it. "Ma'am, this is a secure building. Our security team handles all..." "Your security team is the problem," she said it quietly. "The men I heard, they're guards, building guards. They were coordinating in Russian and they mentioned the east..." "Excuse me." He looked up. His eyes went to her jacket, her bag, her cap. She watched his expression complete its assessment in under 2 seconds and arrive at a conclusion she'd seen on 100 faces before his. "Deliveries are processed at the service entrance, east side. You'll need to..." "I know, I was just there. I need to speak with someone about the building security." "Ma'am, if you have a concern about a package..." "It's not about a package." She kept her voice low, controlled, the way she learned to keep it when she needed someone to actually hear her instead of simply waiting for her to finish. "There are men at the east service entrance. I overheard them planning something, an ambush, in the elevators, at 6. The young man's expression shifted from dismissal to a particular kind of patient condescension that Norma recognized as the face people made when they were deciding how to manage a situation without escalating it. "Ma'am, this is a secure building. Our security team handles all..." "Your security team is the problem," she said it quietly. "The men I heard, they're guards, building guards. They were coordinating in Russian and they mentioned the East Elevator Bank and a 6 window. Someone is going to get killed in those elevators tonight." He stared at her. She could see him processing it. She could see the exact moment he decided that the most reasonable explanation for a delivery driver showing up at the lobby desk with a story about a Russian assassination plot was not that the story was true. "I'll pass your concern along to our security coordinator," he said. "If you'd like to leave your contact information..." "I don't have time for contact information. Whoever is coming through those front doors tonight needs to be warned before 6.
Ma'am, firm now. Done with it. I need you to step back to the service entrance or I will have to ask you to leave the building. Norma looked at him for one more second. Then she turned and walked back outside. The SUV was still at the curb. Min-jae was at the rear passenger door, standing with his hands at his sides, watching the street. He was compact and still in the way of someone who had trained himself to take up less space than he actually occupied. She recognized it because she did the same thing, just for different reasons. She walked straight to him. "Excuse me." He looked at her. Not through her, at her. She noticed that immediately. "The man you're driving tonight, he can't go through the east elevator bank. There are men staged inside. I heard them at the service entrance. They were speaking Russian, coordinating a hit for 6 in the east elevators. I know how that sounds. I know what I look like standing here telling you this, but I speak Russian. I understood every word." Min-jae's expression didn't change. That was interesting. Most people, when you told them something like this, had a reaction. Confusion, dismissal, alarm. He had none of those. He had the flat, measuring stillness of someone running a calculation. What did they say? Exactly. That the 6 window was confirmed. That both units were already staged in the east elevator bank. That the lobby desk attendant had been reassigned so she wouldn't be at her post. And she held his eyes. That the delivery driver waiting at the service entrance would be standing close enough to the scene to take the blame. Something moved in Min-jae's face. Not much, a fraction. "Go back to your vehicle," he said quietly. "Wait there. You have to listen to me. I heard you. Go back to your vehicle." He was already reaching for his phone. Norma didn't go back to her vehicle. She stood on the front steps of Global Tower and watched the top of the street and felt the minutes moving through her body like something physical. 5:51. 9 minutes. And then the revolving doors behind her opened and Tokko Sung-Soo walked through them. She knew it was him before she turned around. She'd seen his photograph twice. Once on a news app story she'd scrolled past 18 months ago about a downtown development deal that had displaced 400 families, and once on a mural someone had painted on the side of a building in her neighborhood that she'd always assumed was political commentary until a neighbor told her it was a tribute. The city had complicated feelings about Tokko Sung-Soo. He had complicated feelings about the city. They had reached an arrangement. In person, he was taller than the photographs suggested, and colder. Not cold in the temperature sense, cold in the architectural sense, like a room designed for function rather than comfort, where everything was exactly where it was supposed to be and there was no warmth left over for anything else. He wore a charcoal suit with a white shirt, collar open, no tie. He carried a briefcase with the ease of a man who had never once used it as a prop, which meant everything in it was real and everything he carried was intentional. He paused at the top of the entrance steps and his eyes swept the street in a way that lasted exactly 2 seconds and missed absolutely nothing. They landed on her. She was still holding the delivery bag, still wearing the cap with the crease she'd never ironed out, still standing exactly where a delivery driver had no business standing, in front of the main entrance, unmoving, staring at the most dangerous man in the city like she had something to say to him. 5:52. 8 minutes. She thought about the lobby desk. She thought about Min-jae, who had listened more carefully than the desk attendant, but who was on his phone right now and had told her to wait. She thought about the package she'd left in the alcove, a prop, a placement, a story someone had already written for her in which she ended up in a police interview room explaining why she'd been standing next to a body. She thought about her daughter's school fund, which she'd promised herself she wasn't going to touch. She thought about the fact that the only reason she was standing here, in this city, at this building, at this exact moment, was because 4 years ago she had loved Russian literature enough to stay up past midnight in a dormitory study room practicing verb conjugations until they moved from her memory into something deeper. She had let the degree go. She had not let the language go. And right now, at 5:52 p.m. on a Tuesday, with 8 minutes left on a clock that only she could hear, Norma Abrams was the only obstacle between Tokko Sung-Soo and the elevator that was going to end him.
The guards flanking the entrance shifted. Sung-Soo raised 2 fingers from his briefcase handle, and they stopped. He looked at her. She looked at him. 5:53. 7 minutes. She had spent her entire career being the person in the room that no one noticed. She had perfected it. Invisibility was a survival skill when you were doing 14 drops a day in a city that did not love its service workers. You moved through spaces without demanding to be seen. You completed the task. You took the tip if there was one. You left. She had spent so long not speaking up that the impulse to stay quiet had become something close to instinct. She felt it now, the pull towards silence, towards stepping aside, letting it go, going back to her car, calling an anonymous tip line, telling herself she'd done what she could. She had $47 in savings and a daughter with a school fund she wasn't going to touch and rent due Friday. She had 14 years of being invisible. And she had 7 minutes. Sung-Soo began to descend the steps toward his car. He was going to get in that car, and Min-jae was going to drive him around to the east side, and he was going to walk through those doors and call the East Elevator Bank because that was what he always did. 3 years, every single time, never the stairs, and the men in that elevator were going to be exactly where they said they would be. 5:54. Norma moved. She came up the steps fast, not running, but the kind of fast that has intention in it, the kind of fast that makes guards reach for things they're not supposed to reach for in front of a building like this. And she crossed the distance between herself and Tokko Sung-Soo in 8 steps, and on the 9th step she reached out and grabbed his arm. His guards erupted. She felt the air change, the sudden, violent electricity of 4 trained men reacting at once, the sound of movement on all sides, and underneath it, the specific cold weight of a situation that had gone past the point where anyone was asking questions anymore. She held on. She looked directly at Tokko Sung-Soo, whose expression was exactly what she'd expected. Not fear, because she suspected he didn't do fear in the traditional sense, but a precise and absolute focus that told her she had approximately 3 seconds before this became a situation she couldn't walk back from. She used all 3. "Don't enter the tower," she said. "The east elevators, 6 o'clock. They're already inside, both units, staged and waiting. I heard them at the service entrance. They were speaking Russian because they thought no one around here would understand." She felt his arm tense under her grip. She kept going. Gregor confirmed the window. The lobby desk attendant was reassigned so she wouldn't be at her post. "Your route was changed to the front entrance at the last minute. They didn't know that. They're still waiting in the East Bank. And that package I was sent to deliver?" She held his eyes. It was a placement. Someone needed a nobody standing close enough to the scene to make a clean story. The guards hadn't moved. She realized distantly that they were waiting for him, that everything in Sung-Soo's operation waited for him, which meant that as long as he was listening, she was still standing. He looked at her for a long moment. The city moved around them. The wind off the street was cold. Somewhere behind her a car horn sounded and fell silent. His eyes went to the building, to the revolving doors, to the east side around the curve of glass and steel where the elevator bank sat waiting in its staged and patient silence. Then he looked back at her. "What's your name?" he said. It wasn't a question. It was the voice of a man who had already decided to file the answer somewhere permanent. She released his arm. "Norma Abrams," she said. "Urban Dash. And I've got a delivery that was supposed to close out my shift an hour ago, so if you're going to have your men shoot me, I'd appreciate knowing now." Something moved in Sung-Soo's face. It wasn't quite a smile, but it wasn't nothing either. He turned to Min-jae, who had materialized silently at his left side, with the phone still in his hand, and an expression that Norma told her he had heard everything she'd said on the front steps, and had spent the last 2 minutes running his own quiet version of the same calculation she had. "East Bank," Sung-Soo said quietly. "Confirm." Min-jae was already dialing. 5:57. 3 minutes. Somewhere inside Global Tower, in the East Elevator Bank on the lobby level, 2 units of men were standing in the quiet and the steel and the certainty that everything was going exactly according to plan. They had no idea that a delivery driver in a blue and yellow jacket had been standing in exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. They had no idea she spoke Russian. They had built their entire plan on the assumption that she was invisible. They had been right about everything except that. If you're still with Norma right now, comment where you're watching from. I read every single one, and I will say hello to you personally. I want to know how far this story has traveled. Drop your city, your country, anything. Let's find out together just how wide our story is going. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now, because what happens when those elevator doors open in Chapter 6 is not something you want to find out from someone else's comment. Min Jae's call lasted 40 seconds. Norma counted them. She stood on the front steps of Global Tower with the delivery bag on her shoulder and watched Min Jae's face the way she'd learned to watch faces when words weren't enough, looking past the surface into the small muscle movements around the jaw and eyes where people stored the things they weren't saying out loud. What she saw was confirmation. He hadn't found nothing, he'd found something, and whatever it was, it had moved in his face for exactly 1 second before he locked it back down and turned to Sung-Soo. He spoke low and close, Korean, not Russian. Norma didn't speak Korean, but she didn't need to. She could read the posture, the slight forward lean, the careful spacing between words that people used when they were delivering information they wished wasn't true. Sung-Soo listened without moving. Then he turned and looked at the building. Not the way he looked at it when he walked out of the doors, with the proprietorial calm of a man surveying something he owned. He looked at it the way a chess player looks at a board when they realize their opponent has been 3 moves ahead of them for longer than they understood. 5:58. 2 minutes. He turned back to Norma. "Miss Abrams." Sung-Soo's voice was even and precise. It had the quality of a room that had been designed for acoustics, every word landing exactly where he intended it. In approximately 60 seconds, one of 2 things is going to happen. Either the East elevator bank is empty and you have made a very dramatic and memorable delivery, or it is not. If it is, he paused, I need you to stay behind me and not move until Min Jae tells you to move. Do you understand? Norma looked at him. She thought about saying that she was a delivery driver and this was not in her job description. She thought about the $47 and the rent and the school funds she wasn't going to touch. She thought about the package in the alcove, the placement, the story someone had already written for her. I understand, she said. Sung-Soo turned toward the building and walked back through the revolving doors. The lobby was marble and silence, and the specific, climate-controlled air of a building that cost more per square foot than most people made in a month. The lobby desk was unmanned. Norma clocked that immediately. The empty chair, the dark screen, the absence of the gray-vested young man who had told her to use the service entrance. Reassigned to North Wing. She felt the confirmation of it in her sternum like a key turning. Sung-Soo moved through the lobby without hurrying. His guards arranged themselves around him with the fluid, wordless coordination of people who had done this so many times it had stopped being a decision and become a reflex. Yoon was on the right, already off the phone, his hand back inside his jacket. Min Jae stayed close to Norma, not guiding her, not restraining her, just close, in the way of someone who had decided she was a variable worth protecting. They crossed the lobby toward the East elevator bank. Norma's mouth was dry. The elevator bank had 4 doors, 2 on each side of a central column. All 4 indicator panels showed the cars at lobby level, waiting. Doors closed. 6 o'clock. The building's overhead lighting hummed. Somewhere in the city outside, a car moved through an intersection. A light changed. The ordinary world continued at its ordinary pace, indifferent to the marble lobby and the 41-floor building, and the woman in the blue and yellow jacket, standing 20 feet from 4 elevator doors that she had been told, in a language no one had expected her to understand, were not empty. Sung-Soo stopped. He stood 10 feet from the elevator bank and he did not move forward. He simply stood in his charcoal jacket and his open collar, briefcase at his side, and looked at the 4 closed doors with the patience of a man who had built an empire by understanding that the most powerful position in any confrontation was the one where you already knew what was coming. He was not walking into those elevators. He was waiting for them to open. Now,
he said quietly. Yoon stepped forward and pressed all 4 call buttons simultaneously. The doors opened. Not all 4, the second from the left, and what was inside it was exactly what Norma had told them would be there. 3 men in tactical black, weapons drawn, arranged for a target that was supposed to step through a revolving door and call an elevator without looking up. They had 1 second of confusion. In that second, Yoon moved. What happened next was fast and loud, and nothing like the choreography of film, which made it more terrifying, not less. Norma had backed against the marble column the moment the doors slid open, exactly as Sung-Soo had told her to, and she stayed there with the delivery bag pressed against her chest, like it was cover, which it was not, but her hands needed something to hold, and it was what she had. The 4th door opened. 2 more men, these ones better prepared. They'd heard the first door, processed the deviation from the expected sequence, and adjusted. One of them had a line on Sung-Soo before Yoon's loyalists cleared the angle. Min Jae moved. He had not struck Norma as a physically imposing man when she'd spoken to him on the front steps. Compact, still, understated. She revised that assessment in approximately 2 seconds. He was fast in the way of someone who had spent years training the body to do what the mind decided before the mind finished deciding it. And he closed distance and changed the geometry of the situation with a precision that Norma reminded, absurdly, of the verb conjugation drills she used to run in the dormitory study room. Systematic, committed, no wasted motion. It was over in less than 90 seconds. Later, Norma would not be able to reconstruct the sequence with any reliability. She would remember the sound more than the sight, the controlled percussion of it, the marble floor, the overhead hum of the building continuing its indifferent climate-controlled operation throughout. She would remember the moment it went quiet, and the specific quality of that quiet, which was different from silence, because it was full of breathing and the settling of things that had been disrupted. She would remember Sung-Soo. He had not moved from the spot where he'd stopped 10 feet from the elevator bank. He had not flinched. He had not ducked. He stood exactly where he'd been standing, briefcase still at his side, and watched the people he'd employed and trusted and paid extremely well get removed from the equation they had designed around his death. When it was done, he looked at the open elevator. He looked at his remaining guards, Yoon and 2 others who had come through the lobby from positions Norma hadn't seen them take, which meant Min Jae's call had activated something she hadn't been aware of. And then he looked across the lobby at Norma Abrams, who was still pressed against the marble column with the delivery bag held against her chest and her heart doing something she was fairly certain was medically significant. He walked toward her. She held her ground. There was nowhere to go and she was too tired to pretend she wasn't terrified, so she simply stood and let him come. He stopped 2 feet away. Up close, he was even more precisely put together than he'd seemed outside. Not a thread wrong, not a hair displaced, as though the last 90 seconds had been a weather event that had simply moved around him. He looked at her for a long moment. "You were supposed to be the fall person," he said. "Yes. And you knew that. You figured it out by the service entrance. Yes. And you still came forward." She thought about the best way to answer that. She thought about the $47 and the rent and the school fund. She thought about 14 years of dropping packages and scanning QR codes and being thanked in the specific, shallow way people thanked service workers when they had already stopped looking at them. "I speak Russian," she said. "I couldn't unknow what I'd heard." Sung-Soo looked at her. Something moved behind his eyes, not warmth exactly, but the recognition of a quality he had spent a long time believing he would not find in the people around him. He turned away without another word. They held her for 2 hours, not in a hostile way, in the way of an organization that has just survived an internal coup and needs to account for every variable before it releases any of them back into the city. She sat in a conference room on the 3rd floor that smelled like recycled air and expensive coffee, and gave her account 3 times to 2 different people who were not introduced to her by name, and who took notes on tablets and asked follow-up questions with the methodical patience of people trained to find the inconsistencies in a story. Her story had no inconsistencies, because it was true. Min Jae brought her coffee after the second round. Real coffee, not the break room kind. He set it in front of her and started to leave, and she said, "You believed me, on the steps, before you made the call." He paused. "I believed you were telling me what you heard. I had to verify what it meant. But you didn't dismiss me." He was quiet for a moment. "You told me I was in the story," he said, "that they'd planned to use you as the fall person. That's not the kind of detail someone invents on a front step in 30 seconds. He looked at her steadily. "I've worked for him 11 years. I know what someone looks like when they're performing concern, and I know what someone looks like when they're actually afraid. You were afraid." "I was," she said. "So was I," he said, quietly. He left her with the coffee. She was released at 8:17 p.m. Her Urban Dash app had flagged the priority delivery as a failed drop. The triple pay had been reversed. She was looking at standard rate for a crosstown run and a note in her account that would affect her weekly metrics. She sat in her car in the parking bay for a moment and looked at the dashboard. Then she put the car in drive and went home. Sung-Soo did not sleep that night. This was not unusual. He averaged 4 hours on good nights and less on nights when the machinery of his operation required maintenance. Tonight, the machinery required significant maintenance, the kind that involved phone calls to people who operated outside normal channels, and conversations that would never appear in any record, and decisions that would ripple outwards in ways that took months to fully trace. Gregor had been unreachable since 5:47 p.m. That told him everything it needed to tell him. He sat in his office on the 41st floor long after the building had emptied, the city spread below him in its nighttime configuration, different from the daytime version, quieter and more honest somehow, stripped of the performance that daylight required.
He thought about the photograph on the credenza. He thought about the fact that he had spent 36 years building a system designed to ensure he never had to depend on anyone he hadn't thoroughly evaluated, compensated, and contingency planned for. He had resources. He had infrastructure. He had people in positions throughout the city whose loyalty he had purchased at rates high enough to make disloyalty theoretically irrational. He had been 2 steps from an elevator, and the thing that had stopped him was a woman in a blue and yellow jacket who made 14 deliveries a day and spoke Russian because she had loved it in a dormitory study room years ago and had never let it go. Not his system, not his intelligence apparatus, not any of the millions he had deployed in the direction of his own protection. A delivery driver with $47 in her account. He pulled up the information his people had compiled on Norma Abrams in the 2 hours since the lobby. It was thorough, because his people were thorough, and because he had asked for it specifically, which meant they understood it was not routine. 34 years old, single mother, 1 daughter, 8 years old, enrolled in a public school in the Eastfield district, 14 years in gig economy work following the end of an unfinished university degree in languages and literature. Current monthly income? Variable, insufficient. Current savings? $47 and a school fund she had not touched. He read it twice. He sat with it for a while. He had spent his career evaluating people by what they could do for him. Skills, access, leverage, utility. People were tools. He'd believed that since he was 18, and it had served him in the way that a certain kind of ruthlessness serves a person when they are building something from nothing in a city that does not care whether you make it. But tools did not run toward danger for strangers. Tools did not override the instinct towards self-preservation out of a conviction that staying silent was a form of participation in something wrong. Tools did not stand in a lobby with a delivery bag pressed against their chest, terrified and unmoved. He closed the file. He picked up his phone and called Min Jae. "The Eastfield district," he said. "I want a full assessment of the infrastructure. Schools, transit, the community development gap analysis that Chen's team ran last spring. Have it on my desk by Thursday." Min Jae was quiet for exactly 1 second. "Yes, sir." "And find me a number for Urban Dash's corporate operations division." Another beat. "I'll have it within the hour."
Sung-Soo set the phone down. He looked at the city. He had built all of this on the premise that loyalty was a transaction and trust was a liability, and the only reliable currency was power. He had been right in the way that a person can be right about something for so long that they stop questioning whether there are things their framework cannot account for. A woman who spoke a language no one expected her to speak had just handed him his life. She hadn't done it for payment. She hadn't done it because she knew who he was or what he could offer. She hadn't done it because any calculation she ran made it the rational choice. She had done it because she heard something wrong and could not unknow it. That was not a transaction. He didn't have a framework for it. He was going to need to build one. 3 weeks later, Norma got a call from a number she didn't recognize. She let it go to voicemail the first time because she let everything go to voicemail the first time. The voicemail was a woman identifying herself as the director of operations at something called the Meridian Community Foundation, asking if Norma had time for a conversation about a community investment initiative in the Eastfield district. Norma listened to it twice. Then she called back.
The conversation lasted 20 minutes. The director was precise and professional and spoke about the initiative in the specific, detailed way of someone who had been given a clear mandate and significant resources to execute it. New transit infrastructure to connect Eastfield to the downtown employment corridor. A scholarship endowment for the district's public schools, 10 awards annually, renewable. A small business development fund targeting gig economy workers who wanted to transition to owner-operator models. And a community advisory board currently forming for which they were seeking members who had deep roots in the district and understood what it actually needed. They were asking Norma to be on it. She sat at her kitchen table with her daughter doing homework across from her and her coffee going cold at her elbow, and she listened to all of it. "Who funds this?" she asked. The director paused for exactly the length of a pause that is not quite natural. "The foundation has several major donors," she said. "One of the primary contributors has asked to remain anonymous." Norma looked at her daughter, who was frowning at a math problem with the specific concentration of a child who had decided she was going to solve it herself before asking for help. She thought about a 41st floor office, a man in a charcoal suit who had looked at her across a marble lobby with the face of someone filing information somewhere permanent. She thought about a photograph on a credenza, a mother in Busan, 1987, laughing at something off camera. She thought about a dormitory study room and Russian verb conjugations and a degree she had let go and a language she had not. "When does the board meet?" she asked. "First Thursday of each month, downtown. We can arrange transportation." "I have a car," Norma said. She took the position. She saw him once, 4 months later. It was at a community event in Eastfield, a neighborhood forum attached to the transit project held in the gymnasium of the elementary school where her daughter was enrolled. The turnout was better than anyone had expected. Norma had spent 3 weeks helping organize it, and she was tired in the specific good way of a person who has been tired for useful reasons. She was refilling a coffee urn when she became aware of a shift in the room's atmosphere, that particular recalibration that spaces undergo when someone with significant weight enters them. She looked up. Sung-Soo was standing near the gymnasium entrance in a dark jacket and a white shirt, collar open, no tie. He had 2 men with him. She recognized Yoon and a newer face she didn't know. No briefcase. He looked out of place the way a piece of expensive furniture looks out of place in a room that was built for function, and he seemed to understand this and to be standing in it anyway with the patient deliberateness of a man who had made a decision and was committed to the inconvenience of it. His eyes found her across the gymnasium in approximately the same 2 seconds they'd found her on the front steps of Global Tower. He walked toward her. She set down the coffee urn.
He stopped at a comfortable distance, closer than a stranger, further than an ally, the precise relational geometry of 2 people who had been through something together that did not have a clean category. Miss Abrams, Mr. Sung-Soo. He looked around the gymnasium, at the families, the school board representatives, the community organizers, her daughter sitting in the 3rd row with a friend, both of them inexplicably delighted about something. "The turnout is better than projected," he said. "People show up when something is actually for them," she said. "That's not complicated.
He looked at her. "No," he said. "I suppose it isn't." She handed him a cup of coffee because it was in front of her and it seemed like the right thing to do. He took it without looking at it, the way people accept things when they are actually paying attention to something else. "I owe you more than this," he said, quietly, not performing it, just stating it, in the flat and direct way of someone who had decided that precision was more respectful than elaboration. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "I owed it to myself to say something. That's different." He considered that. "You're going to be difficult to have on an advisory board," he said. "Probably," she said, "but I'll be honest, you won't have to guess what I think." Something moved in his face again, the same movement she'd seen on the front steps of Global Tower. Not quite a smile, but not nothing. "That," he said, "is rarer than you know." He stayed for an hour. He did not make a speech. He did not position himself near the press table or the foundation representatives, or anyone who could photograph him being present. He moved through the room in the careful, observational way of a man who was learning something and knew enough to understand that learning required silence. Norma watched him when she had time to watch him and thought about a framework built on the premise that people were tools, the long, efficient loneliness of that structure, the way it would hold for years and then crack on the specific morning you were 2 steps from an elevator and realized your millions had not been enough. She thought about the word invisible and what it meant when the people who used it to dismiss you were the same people who had accidentally handed you the information that changed everything. She thought about 14 years of being a variable in other people's systems. She thought about Eastfield, the transit line, the scholarships, her daughter in the 3rd row laughing at something Norma couldn't hear from across the gymnasium. She thought about a Russian verb she had learned in a dormitory study room at 19 years old, slushot, to hear, to listen, to receive what the world is saying and not pretend you didn't. She had let the degree go. She had not let the language go. She had not let herself go. And in the end, on a Tuesday evening at 5:44 p.m. outside a building she'd been sent to as a prop in someone else's story, that had been exactly enough.